My name is Andrew Stewart, and I am a member of the Rhode Island Media Cooperative. Are you a disenchanted Democrat who has been turned off by the scandal-laden candidacy of Hillary Clinton? Or perhaps you are a Republican who is revolted by the behavior of Donald Trump? Maybe you wish you could vote for a third-party candidate, but don't want to throw your vote away and end up helping the major party you loathe the most. But what if there was a way around this? There is, and it is called the VotePact strategy. Formulated by journalist Sam Husseini, it is based around the idea of two potential third-party voters pairing up and agreeing to both vote for the third party of their choosing. I had a conversation with Husseini where he explained his strategy in detail. Sam, you've been doing this a long time, and this is not your first electoral rodeo. What do you think of what has been a very interesting electoral season so far?
Well, it highlights, I think, uh, the searching of much of the electorate for a way out of the predicament of the establishment parties. I think that's one major force, and I think another major force is the the animosity, the desire among people within each party to defeat the other party. And I think a lot of people make their selections during the primaries on that basis. Um, so what I think is needed is a way to channel that animosity um, uh, away from pushing people into each respective party, but in a way for people to question where the establishment candidates are going. It's become a cliche that Trump and Clinton have incredibly high negatives. So I think that their ascendancy is sort of the triumph of celebrity, um, and and I think that a lot of Republicans probably voted for Trump, wanting a way out of the system. Um, but is he really a way out of the system in any meaningful way, or is he just a narcissist who's got all kinds of issues? And Clinton, I think, is galvanizing fear, fear, fear. So in a way, I mean, you're certainly right. I've gone through a lot of election cycles, as a lot of us have, and I've been trying to compel a way out of it. But I think that the contradictions on all sides are becoming more stark. And I think that if people can get past the fear that it's like in Dune, fear is the great mind killer. If people can step back from their fears and look at what they really want, they might be able to find a way out of it, which is what I've been working on.
So, one of the points that has seemed obvious to me is that Rhode Island is perhaps one of the ultimate safe states. It is not a swing state in any sense because of the way that the party system on the local and state level has matured, or perhaps fermented is the proper word. What would you say to voters who are worried about their vote somehow electing a greater evil, I guess, if they vote not for a lesser evil?
Right. So if somebody really doesn't want Trump, but they don't really like Clinton, but they feel like they got to vote for Clinton, even though they would much rather have a third party, whether it's a socialist party or green or libertarian or whoever. Um, I mean, certainly a strategy that I've used going back to '92, I think, has been if you live in a quote unquote safe state, time in New York, and so you could vote for a third party without, thinking that you would help the other, your greater, your worse evil party. And people can certainly employ that in a state like Rhode Island. What I've been more advocating, though, because I think there are certain limitations in that strategy, is a VotePact strategy that I've outlined there, whereby, for lack of a better term, a disenchanted Democrat teams up with a disenchanted Republican and both vote for the third parties of their choice. That way, instead of canceling out each other, one voting for Clinton and one voting for Trump, even though neither of them are particularly happy with either Clinton or Trump, they both get to vote for third parties that they like. They could conceivably even vote for the same third party, and if a third party or an independent party or candidate could position themselves in such a way that they would be getting both disenchanted Democrats and disenchanted Republicans, it could well open the way towards actual electoral victory for an independent party. I don't know whether that can happen in this election cycle, but I think the potential is definitely there and needs to be built towards.
Certainly. And you've previously compared this to an element of a Kurt Vonnegut novel. Can you expand on that?
Absolutely. The Kurt Vonnegut novel is Cat's Cradle, and in that, a scientist comes up with a substance called Ice-9, which is basically water at solidified water at room temperature. And of course, in the novel, and if such a thing were to actually exist, which it doesn't, would be a tremendous threat, because it could end life on Earth, because all water could then become solid because it would spread. But the issue initially in the novel is creating the first bits of it, and that's what I see as the issue with VotePact. I mean, with VotePact, a disenchanted Democrat teaming up with a disenchanted Republican to both vote for the third party of their choice. It's a novel arrangement of human organization. Somebody else came up with the same idea a couple of years ago, a professor in the Midwest, and he called it Vote Buddy. And our society and our media and our politics push people to not dialogue in an effective manner with people, across the aisle in a way that might threaten the establishment. They want people to shout at each other or be quiet, or to unfriend, relatives, who, okay, that my brother-in-law likes Trump, so I'm not gonna, engage him on politics. And I think that the opposite is what's needed, but the first instances are the hardest, is what I'm getting at when the analogy with Ice-9. The first crystallizations are the most difficult, I think. And then once we have examples of people teaming up this way, say, a union activist teaming up with a small businessman, or a Republican who's done a lot of work on race relations, or in this election cycle, obviously, is extremely skeptical of Trump and his misogyny and xenophobia and so on, teaming up with a Democrat who is perhaps is a Sanders supporter, and just simply can't tolerate a lot of pro-Wall Street, pro-corporate, pro-war policies that we see Clinton continuing to engage in. So it's those first crystallizations of people cooperating, coming together in this way. And what I'm looking at doing with VotePact.org is articulating this, and then, having a platform for people, if they were to co-write pieces of teaming up to vote in this manner, and hoping that it'll proliferate and that it'll give people that it'll proliferate and or give people leverage, because the two establishment candidates, their subtext and sometimes their explicit message is, you have to vote for me because you don't want that other one, and therefore I can do whatever the hell I want. I can step on all of your beliefs, but you got to get in line because you don't want that other guy. It's a fear-driven politics, and this is a way of getting out of that.
Now we bring you an example of a vote pact being negotiated in real time. Here is a conversation I had with a traditionally Republican voter with serious misgivings about the candidacy of Donald Trump. We are longtime acquaintances and feel comfortable enough to engage seriously with each other about our own electoral choices in the past. This is someone who could be a family member, a neighbor, or even a business associate that you enjoy talking with about politics. While we are both realistic about the nature of the Democratic and Republican parties, we also have a history of voting for our respective quote unquote lesser evils and would otherwise follow such a course of action if we were not having this conversation. It's September 11th, 2016, so the election is less than 90 days away, and I'm having a conversation here as somebody who voted for Obama in the last two elections with someone that would traditionally vote for a Republican. The issue that I personally have is that I just cannot stomach Hillary Clinton as the nominee. And what are your feelings about Donald Trump?
Sure, that's a good summary. I've been a conservative voter and a Republican for the majority of my time that I've been voting. But there's concerns that I have with Donald Trump's real arrogance and his brashness, perhaps his spontaneity, that I just can't stomach as as a possibility of him in the White House. So I'm having a real hard time justifying in my own mind how I can continue to vote the Republican ticket in this election.
And for a little further clarification, would you probably call yourself a Rockefeller Republican?
Rockefeller Republican, or maybe even a Reagan Republican, perhaps.
Yep. Gotcha. And that entails being more on the liberal end with some of the social issues.
Right.
And even libertarian, perhaps.
It's a fair point, yes.
Okay, and my own position is the opposite end of what the Clinton edifice has always represented, more social democratic in outlook or in favor of what would have been called New Deal or Great Society Keynesian policies in the last century. And just to clarify, there's an overwhelming narrative now that's being promoted in the media that anyone who would even contemplate voting Republican is going to goose step down the main street and, it's the march of the black shirts. But you're not a racist or somebody who even participates in that sort of behavior.
That's how I would view myself. Sure, not in that at that realm at all.
I mean, you've got a background in human resources that includes dealing with different elements of harassment in the workplace, be it on the basis of ethnicity, gender, orientation, ability or disability, that sort of thing, correct?
Sure, diversity as well as equal opportunity, equal employment, yes.
And so, do you think if you were in an employment situation, that the type of things that Trump and some of his more militant followers say would be acceptable in a workplace?
Probably not. It might be a stretch for it to be acceptable in that venue. So I think you make a good point there.
And, that's important because it gives a kind of spectrum to what is the Republican voter. And what are, therefore, your feelings also on Hillary Clinton?
I have some concerns with her trustworthiness, with her continued series of statements that don't appear to be true. Although I think has a lot of good qualifications from experience, I just have grave concerns with her ethics and her trustworthiness for someone in that office.
And I have been really aghast at how this whole email scandal and that behavior really rolled out, because not only did they come out looking like absolute hypocrites with regards to how Comey handled that conference after having been so anti-whistleblower and prosecutorial towards a lot of people in the defense departments, but also it's really astounding that as Secretary of State she would be that callous with an email server. My thought is I'm going to vote instead for the Green Party. What do you think, hypothetically, about voting for the Libertarian Party instead of Trump?
I think that given all the circumstances in this election with the candidates and everything, I think that is a reasonable option for me. Wouldn't necessarily be my first choice, but given the circumstances, I think that's a very reasonable choice this election season.
So in that sense, we're taking 2 votes away, and so it's not a throwaway vote.
Correct.
And that way, there's a lot of moral indignation of, oh, if you vote for a third party, you're throwing a vote away and helping the opposition that cannot get elected. But if you do it in pairs, you're not facing that. You're actually doing quite the opposite.
Sure, I see the logic behind that. That seems to be a very good course to take in this situation.
Right. And so now, if we stay on that, we have a VotePact, and we can talk with other people that we know and develop, perhaps in our own social interactions, a grassroots element that would be seriously contending in 2016 to show we don't like the Republicans or the Democrats.
Sounds like a great course of action.
And there you have it. For those of you who are on the progressive end of the spectrum, I have just effectively taken a vote away from Donald Trump. And for those of you who loathe the Clintons more than anything else, she has also just lost a voter. Now the choice is in your hands. Go out and talk to people close to you who are disenchanted with their traditional political party. Engage in these sorts of conversations and begin to take votes 2 at a time away from the duopoly. It might surprise you to learn that, despite their candidates being extremely problematic, their voters are in fact a lot like you. When you build a vote pact, consider publicizing it. Mail in letters to the editor of your local newspaper explaining your decisions. Tell people on social media in pairs about it. And be sure to use the hashtag VotePact to build awareness in those forums. Thank you for listening today.